Well, I hope you can hear me now. Can you hear me now? Okay. So if you can hear me now, let's start our discussion today. So we want to look at the introduction to statistics. Now, this is one of the units that you're supposed to do. Those who are doing the Bachelor of Economics and Statistics. Now, this is the first unit in statistics that we are supposed to cover. And you will cover more other units as you move forward with your course. So we want to look at the definition or the meaning of statistics. What is statistics? So basically, statistics has two meanings. We want to look at the two meanings of statistics, and the first meaning of statistics is simply facts which can be put into numerical form. All those facts that can be put into a numerical form are classified or are defined as statistics. So we have quite a number of statistics in economics that we can put in numerical form. An example is unemployment statistics. So when we classify the number of people who are employed, those who are unemployed, so this can be presented in form of numbers. And therefore, this is what we refer to as statistics. For example, unemployment statistics. So we have the population statistics, for example. So we normally take a census after every 10 years, and these population figures are presented in numerical form, and therefore they are referred to as statistics. We can say population statistics and employment statistics. Now, the other second meaning of statistics is what we refer to as statistical methods. Now, what are statistical methods? Now, statistical methods are simply devices for abbreviating and classifying numerical statements or facts in any department or field of inquiry, and making clear the relationship that exists between them. So statistical methods are simply the tools that we normally use to classify statements or numerical statements of facts. So as we move forward, we'll be able to understand what are these statistical methods. Because when you are collecting data, so we have a number of steps that you follow. When we collect the data, you classify the data, present the data. So we normally use the statistical methods. Now, we can now analyze or look at the meaning of statistics. So statistics is derived from its plural or singular noun. So we have statistics and we have statistic. So what do they mean? Well, I hope everyone is getting me. There is someone who is still saying that he can't hear me. I hope it's clear from your end. Now, statistics is simply taken to mean the methods and the theories that are applied in the analysis of numerical data for the purpose of making rational decisions. That is the singular meaning of statistics. The methods and the theories that we normally apply in the analysis of numerical data for the purpose of decision making is what we refer to as statistics. Now, this is a very important field of study which we normally use in research to carry out different research. We analyze the data that we have collected, and then we make decisions based on the results that we have obtained. Now, the plural meaning of statistics simply refers to the aggregate of facts which are affected to a marked extent by a multiplicity of causes, numerically expressed, estimated, or remunerated to a reasonable degree of accuracy. Now, these are systematically collected for a predetermined purpose and placed in relationship to each other. Now, in simple terms, what I'm trying to say, the plural meaning of statistics, these are simply aggregate of facts. So the aggregate of facts is what we refer to as statistics. For example, you may want to know the number of people who are unemployed in the country. So if you collected the number of people or the number of people who are unemployed, we refer to as unemployment statistics. So the aggregate number of people who are unemployed in the country, they can be regarded as unemployment statistics. So that is the plural meaning of statistics. Well, Jepet, I can hear you. Now, the link is on the topic. Just give them direction the way you joined the class. Let them open their CDS portal. Go to topic 1. There is a blue button there. So once they click that blue button, they click on join the class. They will simply join directly once they have clicked there. So let them open their portal, go to the topic 1, click that small blue button on topic 1. That's immediately after the notes. Immediately after topic 1 notes, there is a small click blue button. So if they click there, it will simply direct them to join the class. So just give them that information. I hope they will be able to join. Now, well, we can proceed as your colleagues join the class. Now, let's look at the nature of statistical data. So we have said that statistics can only deal with numerical data. And this numerical data can be quantitative. So you understand what we mean by quantitative data. So the quantitative data is something that you can measure or you can count. That is what we refer to as quantitative data. So if data is not quantitative, then we say that it's qualitative. This qualitative data, for us to use it in statistics, we need to convert it into quantitative form. So the qualitative data can be converted into quantitative form so that we can actually use it in statistics. So for example, when we talk about health, how do you measure health? So you can't measure health. This is a qualitative data. And for us to be able to measure health, we can convert it to quantitative data. So for example, we can measure the number of days you have been ill. So if in a year you have been sick like 3 or 14 days in a year, then we can use that to measure your health. So the same case applies to intelligence. How do we measure intelligence? So for us to be able to measure intelligence, we have to administer a test. So once we have administered a test, the scores that you have scored in that test will be used to estimate your intelligence. Now, statistics can also be put in order of rank, for example, colors. So if you are carrying a study that involves colors, so you may not be able to measure the colors, but you can rank the colors. So for example, we have the lightest, you can rank it 1, next one you rank it 2, so that you can now use the quantitative data that you have assigned to those colors in your study. Now in business or economics, most data can be measured or counted, like the absentees of students in class, you can count that. If it is sales, you can count or measure. Quantity produced, you can measure or count that. Now, why is it important that we define statistics? So once we are able to define statistics, this helps us to draw a valid conclusion from the data collected. Now, this unit that we are studying, you are going to apply it later in your course when you'll be required to carry out academic research paper. So whatever we are learning here will be applied in future as you move forward with your studies. And therefore, once you are able to carry out your studies, so one of the requirements is that you will be required to collect the data, analyze the data, and then give a conclusion based on the data that you have collected. Now, it also helps in making a true comparison between areas and over time. So from the definition that we have had about statistics, sometimes you may be required to make a comparison in different areas. Therefore, this definition will be important in making that definition, the comparisons. So we can proceed and look at statistical inquiries. So what is a statistical inquiry? So if you're running a business, so you may be concerned with some issues in your business. For example, if sales have been declining in your business, so you may want to carry out an investigation of why these sales have been declining. Now, this kind of investigation can be treated statistically. So if you want to carry out an investigation of why the sales have been dropping, for example, that is what we refer to as a statistical inquiry. Now, we have steps that we normally follow when carrying out a statistical inquiry. Now, the first step in a statistical inquiry is a problem statement. So you must identify the problem clearly before you can proceed with your statistical inquiry. Now, I've given an example. Sales have been declining in the company or in your company. That is a problem that you want to investigate. Now, this you can test this statistically. Another illustration, suppose the problem that we have concerns the wages in a factory. You want to look at the wage rates and the wages earned. Now, once you are able to define your problem, the next step is the sample selection. Now, based on the area of investigation, it may not be possible to carry out a study of the entire population. Now, because of this, you will be required to select a sample. Now, a sample is simply a group of items selected from the population of the study. So, for example, if we want to study the performance of students in Kenya, so it may not be possible for us to carry out a study based on all the students in the country. Now, because of this, we will be required to select a sample from the students. So we can select a few students and carry out a study on the students selected. This will help us to carry out the study, and the conclusion that we make based on the students will actually come from the sample that is studied. So where the population is large, you will be required to select the sample. That is our second step in statistical inquiry. So you need to identify the problem, then select the sample on which you are going to carry out the study. Now, the population can be classified into two. So we have finite population. So the finite population is the one that actually contains precise or a specific number of elements. So if you are able to count the number of elements in a population, then that is regarded as finite population. You can actually, you know exactly the number of elements in that population. Like if we want to know the number of students in CTech University at a specific time, we can actually count and get the exact number of students. But the second classification of the population is the infinite population. So the infinite population contains an infinite number of elements. So which means you cannot count the number of elements in that population. For example, are you able to count the number of fish in an ocean? You may not be able to count the number of fish in an ocean. That is an infinite population, because you may not be able to count the number of those items in that population. Now, when you are determining the sample for your study, now where the population is too large and you are unable to actually carry out a study based on the entire population, then you must be able to select a sample where you are going to carry out your study. Now, the size of the sample that you select will actually be determined by three things. One, you need to know the kind of information that is wanted. So the kind of information needed will determine the sample size. The cost of collecting data will also determine the sample size. And normally, when the sample size is large, the cost of collecting the information also increases. So the cost will also determine the size of the sample. So where the cost is very high, then you will select a small sample. So the degree of accuracy required from sample will also determine. So where a high degree of accuracy is needed, then a small sample is actually used. Now we have a number of reasons why we can use sample in a statistical inquiry instead of using the entire population. One of the reasons why we normally use a sample is where the population is infinitely large and it is not possible to study the entire population. So in infinite population, it's not possible to carry out the entire study on that population. And therefore, you will be required to select a sample from that population. You study the sample, and then the results you get from that sample, you use it to make a conclusion about the entire population. And that is what we normally refer to as inferential statistics. So you simply take a sample from the population, you study that sample, and the findings that you get from the sample, you use it to make a generalization about the entire population. Now, the other reason why we normally use the sample is the financial and the time constraints. So where we don't have adequate finance to carry out an entire study of the population, so we may be required to use a sample. So we select a few items out of the population, we carry out a study on those items because we don't have adequate finance for that kind of study. We may also have time constraint. So where the time for carrying out that study is limited, then you'll be required to use a sample because using a sample takes less time than when studying the entire population. And the other reason why we can also use the sample is where the entire population may not be accessible. So if you may not be able to access the entire population, then it is not possible to carry out a study based on that population. So in that case, you will use a sample to carry out your study. Now, that is step 3, so step 2. Now, the third step in a statistical inquiry is drafting a questionnaire. Now, once you have identified the problem, you have selected your sample, then the next thing is to draft a questionnaire. Now, a questionnaire is simply a document that contains questions based on the issues you want to collect information on. So you should draft a questionnaire which actually contains questions regarding the exact information you want. Now, before you proceed with the collection of data, it is important that you carry out what we normally refer to as a pilot survey. So a pilot survey is where you simply test whether those questionnaires will be reliable in collecting the information. And we normally do a pilot survey using those questionnaires that you have designed. You simply design a questionnaire, test it by giving out to a few individuals to fill in and check whether they will actually capture the information required. The next step after drafting the questionnaire is collection of data. Now you can proceed once you have carried out your pilot survey. You can collect the data now. You can use enumerators. So depending on how your questionnaire is designed, we have open-ended questionnaires and we have closed questionnaires. So in closed questionnaires, the answers are provided. You simply select the answers provided. But in open-ended questionnaires, the respondents are required to express their answer in writing. Now, the data that you are collecting will depend whether it's a primary data or the secondary data. Now, for secondary data, they already exist in published materials. And therefore, the collection of secondary data may not be a big problem because you simply extract them from the published materials. So primary data, these are the raw data that you need to collect from individuals for the first time. They don't exist anywhere. So you'll have to collect them using the questionnaires that you have designed. And this information is actually collected for the first time. And therefore, you need the methods of data collection, which is the questionnaire that you have designed to collect the data. So once you have collected the data, then there is what we refer to as editing the schedules. So the schedules are those documents, the questionnaires that have been filled by the respondents. So if you have given your respondents questionnaires, they have filled and they have returned those questionnaires. Now, the next thing is to edit those questionnaires. Editing means you need to check whether they are complete, you need to record them, and then you tabulate and make some calculations on those questionnaires. So once you have edited the schedules, then you need to organize the data. That is the next step. So organizing the data simply means you count the items, you sum the values, categorize values, etc. That is the next step after you have edited those questionnaires. Then our next step is the analysis and interpretation of information. You need to analyze the information that you have categorized, you have summed, and that you have counted. Now, this requires some knowledge of statistical methods. So we'll look at the statistical methods later as we move on. So for you to do a good analysis of data, some statistical methods are required. You need knowledge of these statistical methods, and you also need the knowledge of the subject for which the statistical evidence have been obtained. You need to be able to know how to interpret the information and how you can make a conclusion based on the information that you have collected. Now, the last step, the second last step in our statistical inquiry is presentation. So once you have collected the data, you have organized the data, you have analyzed the data, then you need to present that data. So this data is presented in form of tables, charts, and graphs. So you can present your information in form of tables. We have frequency tables. We have charts, so which can see, or which can be used to show the frequency of the information that you have collected, and many other aspects. You can also use the graphs. So we have bar graphs, so we have bar charts that can be used to present the information that you have collected. So we will see as we move forward, we'll be able to discuss in detail about data presentation. How do we present the data that you have collected? Now, the last step is writing of the report. So therefore, you need to write the report once you have made your presentation. So this requires you to give the results of the investigation. Now, based on the data that you have collected, analyzed, and presented, you will be able to make some conclusions about your study. And you also need to make recommendations where necessary. Now, in case of data collection, I said we have two types of data. We have the secondary data and we have the primary data. So the data that is collected from published sources is what we refer to as the secondary data. So it already exists somewhere. So your work is simply to extract the information from where it is published. Now for primary data, so you need to collect the data for the first time from the respondents. So the data does not exist anywhere. It is simply collected for the first time from the respondents. Now, for the secondary data, we may not have a big problem with the secondary data because we only extract them from where they are required or published. But for primary data, you have to go through steps that we have discussed. Now, data can either be qualitative or quantitative. Now, depending on your field of inquiry or investigation, so you may be required to collect quantitative data or qualitative data. Now, qualitative data yields categorical responses. So categorical responses is what we normally refer to yes or no. Now, quantitative data normally yields numerical responses. So the numerical responses is what you obtain from counting or from weighing or measuring. Now, the quantitative numerical responses can be discrete or continuous. So when the quantitative data is discrete, so this simply arises from the counting process. Like if you count the number of items in your pack, there are 10, 12, that is discrete data. For continuous data, simply arise from a measuring process. So for example, when you measure your weight, so you may be 10.6 kgs, so you may be 12.6. That is continuous data. Like your age, your weight, your height, that is a continuous what? Data, which arises from the process of measuring. Now, those are the major steps in any statistical inquiry that you need to understand. So you need to understand those steps so that when you are carrying out a statistical inquiry, you know exactly the steps that you are required to follow. Now we can look at the other part of the introduction part to statistics, and we need to look at types of statistics as a discipline. Now we basically have two types of what? Statistics as a discipline. We have descriptive statistics, and we also have inferential statistics. Now, descriptive statistics refers to those methods involved in the collection, presentation, and characterization of a set of data in order to properly describe the various features of that set of data. So descriptive statistics simply deals with the methods that we normally use to collect data, methods that we use to present the data in order for us to be able to describe in detail that set of data. And that is what we refer to as descriptive statistics. We also have inferential statistics. So for inferential statistics, simply a method that make possible the estimation or making a decision or generalization about a population based upon a sample results. Now, I said earlier that it may not be possible to study the entire population. So where it is not possible to study the entire population, we may be required to select a sample and study that sample. But the findings that we get from that sample, we use it to make a generalization about the entire population. Now, this type of statistics or kind of statistics is what we refer to as inferential statistics. Actually, what we refer to as inferential statistics. You infer the population from the findings of the sample. Now, statistics can be divided into two. So we have the statistical methods and we have applied statistics. So we have discussed about statistical methods. And we said that statistical methods refers to those devices by which complex and numerical data are systematically treated in order to present a comprehensive and intelligible view of them. So the methods for data collection, methods for data analysis, data presentation, those are devices that we use in our statistical inquiry. They're classified as statistical methods. So we have data collection, data organization, presentation, description, interpretation, and forecasting. They lie under statistical methods. We also have applied statistics, and this normally involves the application of statistical methods to specific problems. So we may have different problems in the community that we want to solve, and these methods or these problems may require us to apply statistical methods in order to solve them. Now, what are the variables? Now, a variable in statistics simply refers to anything whose magnitude can change, or anything that can take different values. This is what we refer to as variables. Their magnitude normally changes or can take different values. This is what we refer to as a variable. Now, to make a summary of the statistical inquiry that we have discussed, so the following steps are very important in carrying out your statistical inquiry. So the first step we discussed is the definition of the problem or the formulation of the problem. So you cannot be able to conduct a study if you cannot formulate your problem. So your problem is what will guide you on what you are actually studying. This is the most important step because it will define exactly what is to be studied. Now the second step is to design the study. That is the design of the study. Now the design of the study, so this one will be determined by the population. So we said where the population is too large, you may not be able to carry out a study based on the entire population. And therefore, you need to draw a sample from that population. Where you are studying the entire population, this kind of study is referred to as the census. A census is simply where you are studying the entire population, and where you are studying part of the population, so it is referred to as sampling. Where you have decided to use the sample, then you must decide on the following. You must decide on the type of data that you need from that sample. you also need to understand how you should collect the data. So you know exactly the kind of data you need. How should you collect the data from that sample? And then you should also determine the sample size. So determining the sample size depends on the population and what you want to study. Now, if the population is very large, then that means that you also need to use a larger sample size. So if you are studying 1 million Kenyans, for example, so it will be illogical to use 100 Kenyans from that 1 million to study. That is quite small. Out of that million, probably a sample of 1,000 out of 1 million can be a bit representative. Now, once you have designed or you have come up with a design of your study, then the next step is actually collection of data. You need to know how to go about with the collection of data. So we have different methods that can be used for data collection. We have direct observation, for example. So the direct observation So we have direct observation. Now, direct observation is actually requires you to note or record something from the respondents. So in this case, you will be required to use a method of data collection that either records or notes the observations that you have made from your respondents. You can also use interviewing as a method of data collection. So interviewing is simply a conversation. You need to converse with your interviewees. So when you are interviewing your respondents, you'll be making some recording of the statements that they have made. And through the interviewing process, you'll be able to actually collect the data you need. Now, the interviewing is normally used where direct observation cannot be done. So where you need to get the oral response from your respondents, then the interviewing process is actually required. Now, the third method that you can use for data collection is abstraction. So abstraction is normally used in case of secondary data. So from published statistics, we can use abstraction to get the information that we need. You simply get the source of the data that you need and abstract. You simply pick the information that you need from the documents that you have. For example, we have the economic surveys that are published yearly, and they contain a lot of information regarding the Kenyan economy in all aspects of life, from education, health, manufacturing, everything. They're normally contained in the economic surveys that are carried out yearly. So if you want to carry out a study, a secondary study, and we need secondary data, so we can simply go to the economic surveys that are carried out every year, and pick the information from there. For example, you want to know the trends in the economic growth in Kenya. So we simply go to the economic surveys, pick the information from there, and then carry out our study using the data that we have collected or we have abstracted from the economic surveys. So we can use abstraction. We can also use questionnaires. And in this case, we have postal questionnaires. Postal questionnaires, you simply post the questionnaires to the respondents. So the respondents are required to fill those questionnaires and then send them back to you. But this is the method that is least satisfactory because some people may fail to respond to your inquiry. So where they fail to fill those questionnaires and then send back to you, then you may have a problem in carrying out your investigation. The other step is organizing and a description of the data. So we have also talked about it. So once data has been collected, so it should be arranged in a reasonable form. So for example, I have collected a database of student performance in statistics. So if I've collected the marks for students, so you may not be able to make any conclusion from the marks collected unless you organize those marks. So for example, you need to organize them into grades. So how many scored A, how many scored B, how many scored C, etc. So once you have organized the data into that group or into those groups, then for example, you need to again continue and classify. For those who scored A's, how many girls scored A's, how many boys scored A's. You need to classify them further. That is organizing the data. So you can classify the data in different ways. So based on what you want to study from that data. Then the next step is inferences. So inference stage is actually the final stage in a statistical inquiry. So inferences, you are making a conclusion. You make a conclusion based on the results that you have obtained from your study. So if you studied as a sample, then you make a generalization about the entire population based on the sample that you have collected, sorry, that you have studied. So if you are studying the performance of students in a school and you picked a few students in each form, for example, from Form 1, you picked a few, Form 2, a few, Form 3, a few, then the results that you get from that sample, you use it to make a generalization about the entire school performance. That is what we refer to as the inferential stage. You simply make a conclusion from the sample that you have studied on the entire population. That is what we refer to as inferential statistics. you make inferences based on the findings that you have obtained from your sample. What are the functions of statistics, if I can ask? Now, statistics simplifies the data. For example, I've mentioned about student performance. If you collect marks of students, those are just marks. So if somebody scored 50, the other one scored 70, 80, those are simply marks. They cannot make sense unless you simplify those marks, present them in a manner that you can extract some meaning from those marks. For example, you need to organize them into grades. So once you have collected the marks from students, you organize them into grades. So those who scored 7th and above, those are A's. Those who scored 6th and above, between 6th and 7th is a B. Between 5th and 6th is a C. Between 40 and 50 is a D. And then between 0 and 39 is an E. Once you have organized those marks in that form, now actually you can see now some sense out of those marks. You'll be able to tell how many students scored an A, how many scored B, how many scored a C, how many scored a D. So you can proceed now again and identify how out of those A's that you have, how many are girls, how many are boys. So from there, you can be able to tell, for example, that boys performed better than girls, or girls performed better than boys, once you have done that classification. That is what we mean that it simplifies data. Statistics furnishes a technique of comparison of certain facts, so which may be meaningless until and unless they are capable of being compared with similar facts. So in simple terms, statistics helps us to make comparisons. I've mentioned about those student marks. If you are not able to classify the marks into grades, and then you are able to make a comparison between boys and girls. So it's these statistical techniques that helps us to make that comparison. For example, you'll be able to tell whether boys scored better than girls, or girls scored better than boys. So we can also say that statistics tests the law of other sciences, verifies the laws with the help of relevant statistical data and application of statistical methods. Now, as we move forward, we'll be able to test quite a number of things using the statistical techniques, like we'll be using the regression analysis. So we'll also use correlation analysis. So for example, you may want to know whether there is a relationship between student performance and the gender of that student. So you can carry out what we refer to as a correlation study to tell whether there is a relationship between gender and performance. Statistics also attempts to interpret conditions. We can use statistics to understand significant features of a phenomenon and possibly interpret the conditions of the phenomenon under study. So in carrying out various research, we normally use the statistical methods to interpret a number of conditions. So statistics also help a lot in policy making. Now, you as an economist, so you are being trained as economist now. And what we refer to as policy making will be key for you as economist. Now, when we carry out research, the findings that we get from research, they are normally used for policy making. So the policy making simply provides some rules and regulations pertaining what should be done in those areas that you have carried out your study. So the research that you carry out are normally used for policy formulation. And this is a key area in economics. Sorry for distraction. Somebody interfered with the. Well, I've said that we can use statistics for policy making, and all the research that we normally carry out in economics. So we have policy implication part. So where can it be applied in our really life situations? Okay, what are now the uses of statistics? Where do we use statistics? Routine administration. For example, we have the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics. What is the role of the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics? The Kenya National Bureau of Statistics is responsible for collecting data in all aspects of life that are needed for decision making by the government and also by the private sector. I've mentioned about the economic surveys that are normally published in every year. The Kenya National Bureau of Statistics is the one that is responsible for collecting the data in Kenya and publishing the data in what is referred to as economic surveys. Statistics can also be used in planning and control. So the government normally use statistics to plan. The private sector also use statistics to plan and control their operations. So you have heard of the budget when the government is preparing a budget. So that budget is prepared based on the data that's collected. We can also use statistics to carry out business or market research or industry research. Statistics is also used in quality control. There is what we refer to as statistical process control in industries or in manufacturing. And this is simply a process that ensures that the products that are produced meet the predetermined size or quality standards. We use this statistics or statistical methods in budgeting and also in science and research. When we are designing experiments, we need data. We need to analyze the data that we have collected, compile, and also present the data. What is a statistical unit? Now, the compilation of statistics entails counting or measurement. So this is a very important. It is important to define the statistical unit clearly. So we have two types of statistical units that we can use. So we have the physical unit. But the physical units are normally used in day-to-day life. Like we have shillings, we have liters, we have kilometers. Those are the physical units. We also have the arbitrary units. So the arbitrary units are normally adopted by the statisticians for their own use. Now, the statistical units must meet some requirements or conditions. They must be specific and unmistakable. They should allow for only one interpretation. So if it is volume of milk, for example, the volume of milk is either measured in liters, it's measured in what? Liters. The statistical unit must be homogeneous. So it should not imply different characteristics at the different times and the place. So if it is a liter of milk in Nairobi should be the same as a liter of milk in Mombasa and everywhere. It must be homogeneous. It should be stable. It should not fluctuate. So that statistical unit must be appropriate and ascertainable. So it should be suitable for the purpose it is intended for. Finally, to make a summary of the introduction part, so we need to look at the types of data. And I said we have two types of data that we can use. So we have the primary data. So, and this is the information that is collected first for the first time from the respondents to specific questions. So it is obtained directly from the respondents for the purpose of that survey. So it is unanalyzed data. So it has not been analyzed. The information you get from the respondents for the first time is what we refer to as the primary data. The secondary data is what is available in printed or published materials. So which means it has already been selected or it has already been collected from other sources, published and maintained somewhere. That is what we refer to as the secondary data. Now, that is a brief introduction of statistics. And the floor is open now for questions that you need to ask for clarification, comments that you may want to make, or an explanation that you may want to seek. The floor is now open.